Hey, everybody. It is August the 2nd, 2024. After a 1-week vacation, the Line Podcast is back. We're going to talk Jasper and what's going on in Alberta. We're going to talk about what is going on and what may be about to happen in the Middle East. And I'm going to aim some friendly fire at members of the media. All that and more on the latest episode of the Line Podcast. Well, Jen, you and I decided to take a week off last week. I was out of town. You had some family stuff going on. It was a relatively quiet news week, at least in terms of the stuff we would talk about. There's a lot going on in the world, but in terms of like podcastable stuff, it was relatively quiet. And then Jasper burned down.
True. But first, before we get into that, I think that we may need to acknowledge a significant change here at the Line Podcast, particularly for video viewers. Are you ready for this?
Oh, you have bangs.
Yeah, I have bangs now. I'm trying hard. Jasper, yes. Jasper burned down. I was unable to get over there because I am single parenting this week. Obviously, my thoughts and heart are with Jasper. People who have been reading the Line religiously, as I know you all are, will know that I've already done a pretty extensive written piece on Jasper, at least from Calgary, because I was not able to physically get out there. Looking in particular how should I say this? There were actually a number of scientists and even former Parks Canada staff people who have come out in recent days basically saying, you people had been warned, the federal government, the council, Parks Canada staff, all of these people had been warned extensively and repeatedly by numerous scientists that they had created a dangerous situation around Banff by their unwillingness to engage in mechanical thinning or logging of the dead pine, of the dead pine forests that existed just outside Jasper. These pine forests were dead as a result of the largely mountain pine beetle infestations. I mean, at least since 2017, and I mean, I'm increasingly starting to see some evidence that warnings went back even further than that they had created quote unquote a tinderbox situation around that area that inevitably was going to light up. And not just light up in an ordinary wildfire scenario, but was going to create a kind of mega fire, something so intense, so hot, so fast moving that it was going to threaten Jasper townsite and a lot of the existing ecosystem around it. They were warned by many, many people, but I spoke to two in particular who went very public with their warnings back in 2018. Emil Begin and Ken Hodges, who were foresters who had been working in BC for many, many years. They flatly told many people who were in charge of the administration around Jasper, look, there's going to be a major forest fire and the town site's going to be potentially threatened in that within the next 10 years. And of course, that was like back in either 2017 or 2016. And of course, 6 years later, here we are. So since that story has come out, and I think around that story coming out, there's been a lot of what feels to me very much like two things are happening. One, there's a lot of ass covering. You have Guilbeault coming out. You had the mayor of Jasper coming out saying, nothing more could have been done. We did the best we could. And look, the fact that we managed to save a third of the town from this really, really intense fire is in itself a sign of success. And my position on this is, if you were looking at a third of a historic town site like Jasper burned to the ground and calling that a success, I don't you're telling me that, was that the plan then? Was the plan to have a third of the town site burned down? I would like to give some very due credit to the people, to the first responders and to the firefighters who operated to save as much of the town as they could. And they actually did a fantastic job preserving critical infrastructure. There doesn't seem to be any debate that once the fire started, everything that could have been done was done. So there's no incompetence or criticism I have for those people at the point. I mean, it sounds like the firefighters did a pretty miraculous job saving what they could. The only question at this point is whether or not that kind of a mega fire could have been prevented in the first place. And there's quite a lot of evidence suggesting that not only could that mega fire have been prevented, or at least mitigated pretty significantly, but also lots of people had warned them of exactly this kind of a scenario playing out. So I think that was worth noting. My piece came out, I can't remember exactly what day, I think it was Tuesday. And then shortly, I think almost the same day, Black Club.
It was Tuesday, yeah.
Tuesday. And then basically the same day, Blacklock's also came out, and Lauren Gunter at The Sun came out as well with a column that referenced something that I did not have my hands on when I wrote my piece, and that was the 2022 Jasper National Park Management Plan. This noted that between 2014 and 2021, of the 285 burns that had been scheduled for in and around Jasper, only 46% of them had actually been completed. And frankly, also of the mechanical thinning that had taken place in the park, it was really a fraction of what needed to be done. So, the evidence is now starting to pile up that there were the forests around Jasper were pretty critically undermanaged, and then lots of people knew about it. And also that a lot of people had been very, very reluctant to move toward more aggressive action around that area, probably for a lot of different reasons, but definitely one of them was I think, rooted in an ideological idea that the purpose of a park is to maintain something called ecological integrity, which is the pine beetles roll in, you just let the natural forces of nature take that situation over, and you try to stay out of it as much as possible. And that creates this really problematic and difficult paradox when you're trying to maintain ecological integrity in a pristine wilderness environment while also preserving the health and safety and property of people who are living in the towns in that pristine wilderness environment. There's a paradox here that can't quite be reconciled there. So that's an interesting problem. I think that the other thing that really struck me about the response to the column as well was people are trying to fall into this really false polarized trap between climate change gone done it, and it wasn't climate change, it was just parks mismanagement. I think this is an absolute false dichotomy. Climate change is absolutely an aggravating factor in these forest fires. Almost no one I talk to who has any credibility disputes that we're dealing with fewer freezes, deep freezes, which have an impact on the mountain pine beetle population, and we're also dealing, probably more importantly, with hotter, drier, windier forests. So yeah, of course, climate change is an impact in that, but that doesn't mean that forest management isn't also a factor here as well. And if you are a believer in climate change and you believe that climate change is a reality that we're having to live with and deal with right now, then it is all the more incumbent upon you to be assertive in hardening your infrastructure, building fire breaks, managing forests around towns, doing these kinds of things, because you know that the climate is changing around you and that climate change is going to create those risks. So you have to be that much more aggressive and assertive in trying to mitigate those risks. So for me, this weird false debate between the climate change gone done it people and the government screwed up people, I just think this is an absolutely pointless debate that doesn't get us anywhere. Climate change is happening. We have to be able to understand what the risks of the climate change are, and we have to move to mitigate those risks. The government failed to mitigate those risks adequately in this case, as evidenced by the fact that a third of a town burned down. This is very basic accountability journalism to me, and getting sucked into this false dichotomy is a waste of time, as far as I can tell. That's all I kind of had to say about that. But anyway, that's my rant.
I think it's interesting, right? Because I wrote a column years ago. I don't remember what the column was about anymore, but someone, a prominent liberal, said Gurney has completely missed the point with this column. And it's like, no, I made the point I was making. I didn't make the point you wanted me to make.
Yeah.
And I think reading a lot of the back and forth coverage on this one, it's exactly what happens with almost every even remotely contentious or disputed or debated or controversial issue, which is basically it becomes you either use this incident, tragedy, event, whatever it happens to be. You either use this as a platform to reiterate everything that I want you to say to be on the right side of an issue, or you're an asshole and you're a denier and you're against the cause. And I think I'm just echoing what you said, because I think you said it so well. But yeah, I don't dispute climate change's contribution to this. You don't dispute climate change's contribution to this. But the higher the stakes, the more important to get the basics right.
Well, and also the foresters who I spoke to, who warned these government entities in 2018, were explicit about saying climate change was an exacerbating factor in managing these risks. So nobody's denying the aspect of climate change here. But this is not an either or
A
scenario.
lot of people are, but not you.
Well, not me. That's fair. I get really frustrated with people who try to, how should I say this, simplify complicated problems and create omni-causes for everything. Whenever I see someone making a claim that an omni-cause is responsible for everything, that makes me very suspect. It's never one thing. It's all, especially when you're talking about natural systems, like it's always intensely complicated. So anyway, that's just a little tweak that I'm going to make. And then the other thing that I would say is like, look, if we're going to say climate change is a thing that's happening and we need to take that seriously, that, and obviously acknowledging mistakes were made in Jasper is necessary in order to course correct in terms of how we deal with other types of scenarios like Banff. Like already people are starting to ring the warning bells about the risks of the Banff town site. Okay, what can we learn about what happened in Jasper here and take those lessons and apply them to Banff? Do we need to be creating fire breaks around Banff?
Climate change.
Do we need to like be thinning the forests around Banff? Are there pine beetle
climate change. Climate change.
Okay, but here's the problem. We in Canada can't stop that.
Climate change, carbon tax.
Okay, but then shouldn't we be using the carbon tax to try and spend the money on the things to help mitigate for the problems of climate change? Like maybe like spend that money on fire breaks or more thinning?
The middle class and those working hard to join it.
Say maybe it would be great if we didn't have another town burned down.
Who has that kind of time? Yeah, look, I mean, there was a really interesting moment early in the pandemic when I think the situation was novel enough that people who were paying attention, which I think was most people, within the limits of their intellectual ability, their education, their understanding of the issues, I think almost everybody approached it with an open mind because it was so novel a situation that it was kind of like, oh, holy shit, what's this? We'd better figure out what to do because I don't want to die. And that lasted a few months. And then what began to happen and has never reversed itself was that very predictably, everyone's position on COVID kind of drifted back to the center of gravity of their ideological position on everything. You didn't have a lot of default lefties who were skeptical of mask mandates, and you didn't have a lot of libertarians who wanted vax passports. Everyone kind of gradually drifted back to whatever their starting position would be. And I'm looking like a third of a town has been destroyed. And not one person has surprised me with their perspective on it. And you said before, I think it's basic accountability journalism. I would even go a step further. I would delete one word for that. It's basic accountability. When something bad happens, how often in life is there absolutely zero that we can learn from it? Like the collective we. Like every once in a while, there might be an incident, a disaster, a catastrophe that is so lopsidedly monocausal that there really aren't any lessons to learn from it. Mm-hmm. But those are pretty rare. It doesn't happen a lot in real life. And we live in a time, we live in a place where, I've talked about this before. Literally everything is just grist for that day's mill of the same debate we have without cease, except when we're sleeping at night. And then we wake up and the great battle resumes. And it's Jasper. It's a lady Olympian with chromosomes. It's a shooting. It's the Middle East, which we'll talk about in a minute. It's just ceaseless arguing all the time. No one is actually interested in learning lessons and applying them for the gradual betterment of human civilization. It is all in the interests of dunking on someone online.
I've also kind of, I don't know, I got very angry listening to the media, and I won't name names about the Jasper stuff over the last week. I got really, it was an anger born of a feeling of increasing isolation because, and I think that COVID actually COVID catalyzed everything in our society, but COVID really changed people's perspectives on their roles in society, especially in journalism, and in a way that was not good. Because in journalism, we used to have an understanding that accountability, firstly, we used to operate under an assumption of distrust of the government, collectively, left, right, all of us. used to be like, no, I'm under no obligation.
Distrust of power.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I'm under no obligation to take you or your experts or your authority at face value. Thank you very much. That is not my job. My job is to listen to what you have to say, evaluate it, challenge it, test it, and present it to the public. Like that was the fundamental core value of the job. And I think that COVID happens, and I think this was happening before COVID, but COVID happens, and all of a sudden that sort of idea that your job as a journalist is not to trust the government became a tribally affiliated with a kind of anti-COVID right-wing coded value. And the end result of that is that the number of journalists who feel comfortable saying, I don't believe this expert, I think this expert is full of shit, or I think this politician is covering their ass, this sounds like ass covering to me, are more and more afraid to do that because they don't want to be coded as anti-expert. They don't want to be coded as disinformation. They don't want to be coded as populist. They don't want to be coded as this sort of thing. And so that winds up creating this like hyper tribalized journalism environment where people who are then do like, hey, I think the government may have screwed the pooch here, get coded a certain way, depending on government they're believing they screwed the pooch. I think that's a bad change in the way that we talk about government, the way we talk about power, the way we deal with power. I don't think that journalism should, like, I think that journalism is inherently always going to be ideological. Like, I think it's really normal for people to split along sort of generally, broadly speaking, left and right tribes and to consume the news that aligns with their viewpoint.
The divides are eternal, right? Like
the divides are eternal.
Philosophical divides for a reason, and you'll find them everywhere in civilization.
And I'm not going to like deny that like I'm probably not reading very much of the communist press because I'm just like, oh, I can't even. I get it. So like I'm like most readers in that respect, but at the same time, I think that there still has to be left or right this shared value among journalists, and the shared value being our job is to question power, man. And that's power, whether it's academic power, government power, expert power. Just because someone has a credential does not mean they're not lying to you. Like that you have to come into that with that assumption. And I wish that I think we have to get back to that. I really do. But that's just my perspective on the matter.
Yeah, and then that's a media specific comment. We'll talk about the media in a more deep way in a couple minutes. But I think there's a broader point, Jen, which is also how. So I mentioned this to you before we started recording. My ears are ringing today. I was at a Green Day last night in Toronto, and fantastic concert. Absolutely loved it. If you had a chance to see them on the tour, highly recommend it.
We're clearly having a 90s throwback moment right now. I mean, I was talking to Matt, is like, my hairstyle now looks like something out of Buffy the Vampire Slayer circa 1993, and I'm here for it.
I was there for Dookie. The entire album played live. One of the things I was thinking about, Green Day has always been a politically active band, taking kind of progressive left-wing, anti-establishment, anti-corporate positions. And I didn't care. I like their music. And I was thinking on the ride home that it's getting harder and harder to find people who are prepared to go, yeah, I really disagree with Jen about this, but I like her. Or I disagree with her about X, but I agree with her about Y.
That explains what's happened to my Christmas cards over the years, I guess.
No, I don't think it does. I think people just don't do those anymore. But overall, I don't like where we are as a society. I think it's the ability to go, I think you're wrong, even about an issue that I hold near and dear, but I like your book, or you're a great singer, or even you'll be my neighbor and I'll talk with you about the local speed bump initiative, or I'll help you shovel your sidewalk. I just see that shutting down. And I know we've drifted a bit from the Jasper thing, right? But like I said, kind of at the beginning, it's sort of like, oh, what is today's issue? What are my people saying about it? Fuck all the other people. And then we all get up tomorrow, we just do it all over again. Personally, I just find it exhausting.
And I personally all governments do this. I get it, especially governments at the end of the term. They get away from this idea that constructive criticism is valuable, right? And they kind of hunker down and they go into full-on CYA mode, right? Nothing more could have been done. Everything's perfect. Everything's fine. The way we're doing things is fine.
Well, every criticism is aid to the enemy.
Yeah, exactly, right? So I understand how you get there psychologically. But if you can't take constructive criticism in this instance and learn from a mistake here and acknowledge to yourself and others that a mistake has been made, errors were made, then you can't apply that lesson to other situations. And then, like I said, what happened to Jasper was really, really similar, I suspect. I mean, we'll know more going forward. Was really, really happened to what happened to Waterton back in 2017. If we had learned the lessons of Waterton, we would have moved aggressively then. And now I'm saying, like, there are literally already experts coming forward saying, like, Banff's at risk. Are we going to let this happen again in 5 years?
Yeah,
okay,
of course.
Just checking. Because just checking.
Because the purpose of all of this stuff we're talking about now is not to learn lessons and not to apply those lessons to mitigate future disasters. That's not the purpose of it. It's blame assignment and accountability mitigation. People are only as curious about these issues as they need to be to find something that they can plausibly use to blame someone else for it. Once they have it, they tune out.
Like and subscribe.
Well, we had a nice break of not talking about the Middle East, but that didn't last, didn't survive first contact with reality. I had a friend joke with me this week, and listener and viewer beware, a little bit of dark humor coming your way, but I thought it was on point. My buddy joked with me that Israel is currently reenacting the final few minutes of The Godfather. Now, those of you who remember The Godfather will remember that in the final few minutes of The Godfather, all the enemy bosses are killed. And that has been from the rival families. It's the mafia war spills over and all the guys get whacked. We've seen a series of assassinations that some of which Israel has claimed and some of which it is suspiciously said, well, not suspiciously, it is notably said absolutely nothing about. But it has been a bad week to be a senior commander and a group engaged in conflict with Israel. A series of missile strikes or explosions have taken these guys out. The most dramatic one was, well, I mean, let me kind of walk everybody through, and this is grim stuff. But just under a week ago, a Hezbollah rocket struck a soccer game in northern Israel and killed a dozen kids. So there had been an expectation that Israel would respond and then Hezbollah would respond to that. Israel seems to have pulled off a targeted strike, killing a senior Hezbollah official. There was another strike killing another senior Hamas leader. And then in Iran this week, and this is important, this is on Iranian territory in the capital of Tehran, the political chief of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, was in Tehran for the inauguration of the new Iranian president, and he exploded. And no one really knows why yet, but Israel ain't saying anything about it, but the dude went to his room at a supposedly secure Iranian compound, and kaboom. The original speculation was a missile strike. The more recent speculation is that Israel somehow got into the secure compound months ago, planted a bomb, and remotely detonated it. So the new Iranian president is now humiliated. Hezbollah is furious. And there's a lot of speculation that we're going to see another exchange of missiles, at least, like we did a few months ago. Honestly, Jen, I told you I'd set it up, that I would lay out the context. It's Friday afternoon when we're recording this. Every morning this week, I've woken up and immediately checked my phone to see if anything catastrophic happened overnight. We're back to that. We had a kind of a nice break where we weren't doing that, but here we are again. So by the time the listeners hear this, by the time maybe, we publish it on Friday, maybe someone doesn't get around to listening to it until Sunday, maybe everything has totally gone apeshit between now and then. But as of Friday, that's what's happened so far, and that's why people are on edge.
So, I mean, firstly, I would just say that maybe if Israel had moved a little bit further away from the shelling civilian areas in Gaza and a little more toward targeted assassinations, the world might be a little happier with Israel right now. That would be an improvement, I think. I mean, I don't want to focus too much on Middle Eastern politics because, I mean, as we've said on this podcast before, we take note of it, but we're a Canadian podcast. We focus on Canadian politics and we focus on the implications on world events on Canadian politics. So I want to pivot a little bit to talking about something that happened in Canada as a result of this, as a result of the Hamas leader's assassination. You had CBC News foreign correspondent Chris Brown went to Twitter. First mistake, don't take to Twitter, especially in response to anything to do with Israel and Hamas. And he tweeted something to the effect of, and I'll quote here, "If you are serious about negotiating a ceasefire, killing the guy on the other side who is negotiating, it seems ... like a deliberate effort to make sure it doesn't happen," Brown said on X. Pierre Poilievre took swipes at Chris Brown. I'm going to get into that in a minute. But, I mean, look, I don't think that what he said on Twitter was like inappropriate for a journalist to note on Twitter. I would note that it strikes me as pretty juvenile analysis on its face. Like, why are you assuming that Israel is working toward a ceasefire? Why are you assuming that everyone is working toward the outcome that you here in Canada would be most comfortable with? That's kind of my first take on this.
You know, honestly, I'll let you finish the thought, but honestly, I would also say it's juvenile because Israel there have already been hostage releases and prisoner swaps. Israel has shown it's prepared to negotiate here. Maybe blowing up the existing Hamas negotiator is exactly what is required to get to the ceasefire.
That's right. I mean, fair enough. I mean, there you go. So I don't know. It was a pretty banal tweet. I don't think, like I said, I don't want to dogpile the guy because, I mean, look, we've all had the odd bad tweet, myself included. I'm certainly not innocent of Let she who hath not made a bad tweet cast
far from it, Jen. Your tweets are perfect.
Perfect every time. So, like, I'm not trying to give Chris too much of a hard time here. I also think, like, come on, Pierre, stop. Don't you have a job to do? Like, you're like picking fights with CBC reporters on, tweets. It's not like he's going out being like, this Hamas leader was a hero of the revolution here, man. Like, it wasn't the best tweet, but it also wasn't really worth coming down on him for either. Like,
there were a lot of stupid Hania tweets, though. Like,
there were. Okay, so let's talk about the stupid Hania tweets.
Well, I don't think I have a lot to say about this, but like, one of the things, and you and I as newspaper veterans can attest to, is that oftentimes there's that real race to get the story up first, because the first person to get the story online gets the Google love, gets the Twitter love, et cetera, et cetera. There is a business incentive to be first, but there's also a professional incentive to take 30 seconds and just cool off and then read your own headline. And I'm like, just ask yourself, is this going to strike the right tone? And a lot of people were like, leading advocate of ceasefire killed by Israel, which sort of makes it sound like Israel found a guy who was like doing a sit-in at a lunch counter somewhere and popped a 9mm round into his head. No, they killed the political chief of Hamas, which we can debate that as strategy or like, 100%. But yeah.
To try and make him sound like a peace activist is no.
So take the extra 30 seconds, read the headline. This is something you and I have joked about before. Before you publish an article, ask yourself what your worst enemy will infer from the headline. And you're never going to be bulletproof, and you're never going to please 100% of people 100% of the time. But the extra 30 seconds is worth it. So I suspect that Poilievre grabbed a Canadian example, not the best, because I agree with you. Brown's tweet wasn't great, but it wasn't that bad.
Yeah.
I think Poilievre saw a Twitter moment and he found a Canadian angle and he jumped on it.
Well, and that's fine, except for the fact that I would just, he's going to be prime minister soon, man. I'm not.
He's not going to stop.
I know.
There shall be no sudden unfurling of the new Poilievre.
I know he's not going to stop. It's just that it's not that I expect him to change. It's that I do expect people to recognize that Twitter's over now. Twitter's over.
It ain't.
It's MySpace, friends. Like, I haven't been on it in weeks and I've missed nothing. In fact, I'm happier. I go for walks.
You have bangs?
I have bangs now. I'm taking some effort into my appearance. I've done some deep psychological work, working through some trauma. Anyway, look, I mean...
You're much worse off psychologically, but you are doing the work.
I'm not sure that that's true. But anyway, the place, like, I just don't... It seems there's a certain point where Twitter is going to get to the point where it's just MySpace. It's old people, the last old losers left who didn't realize that this isn't cool anymore. And I'm going to leave this space before I'm one of those last old losers. And I think that we're there, man.
When you fall off the wagon, though, you fall hard.
Occasionally,
3 days from now, you're going to be at like tweet 78 of a thread that is just identifying every single Canadian journalist by name and then insulting them. And then a week later, you're going to be like, yeah, Twitter, it's over.
That would be extremely funny. In fact, don't tempt me because now I kind of want to do it. No, I mean, look, I'm going to accept myself and demonstrate enough compassion to myself to recognize that I am not perfect.
There's the psychological work.
That's the psychological work coming through. That I occasionally lose my temper and I occasionally get a little bored and I occasionally, want to stir up some shit just for fun. I have this within me. It's great. It's okay. It's okay to accept this fact about myself.
I have a friend. Like she and I are still friends, but I used to make fun of her when we were in university because, to be clear, she does not have a drinking problem. Like, I'm not mocking a person here who has like a substance abuse issue, but she would say to me, I went way too hard on the weekend. My body feels like crap. I'm exhausted. I got essays due all this week. I cannot go party this weekend. I've got to just knuckle down, make some home cooked meals, get my work done. Friday night, 3 a.m., I'm in an alley holding her up while she pukes. And there was like a 100% correlation between her telling me she couldn't go out that weekend and her going out that weekend. You saying Twitter is over and that you're not going on, I don't think it has a 100% correlation to Jen going on a Twitter bender, but it's a pretty high correlation.
Look, I mean, nobody's ever recovered. Okay, we're all in recovery. Not at all times. I'm going to forgive myself if that happens. I just hope that it doesn't.
You want to know where my dark sense of humor goes, though?
I'm just 40 years old, and I just can't bring myself to be on the same social media site I was dicking around on like when I was 29. Like, I'm an adult now.
Look, this is dark humor, and people listen to this segment thinking we'd be talking about the Middle East, and by the time they're listening to you and I talk about MySpace, Tehran might have gone up in a mushroom cloud.
Perfection. And I will be on a Twitter bender over this.
Exactly. Well, look, on the only other thing I would mention, and this is, you're getting a little bit more serious here. You mentioned, I think you're quite right. Like, I stay abreast of the situation in the Middle East, but I do it from an outsider perspective. I don't want more people to die. Like, that's kind of my view on the Middle East. That's my meta analysis here. But I expect more people to die, and I think the situation is going to get worse before it gets better. I think Israel and Iran have been on a collision course for a generation, and as we've seen in so many other, or more, and as we've seen on so many other fronts in recent years, you can only skirt disaster so many times before you eventually just hit it head on. So I don't know what's going to happen, but we're back in the place where, I don't know, maybe they lob a couple of demonstrative missiles at each other, or maybe it's the Third World War kicks off this weekend. I honestly have no idea. But what I do know is that in Toronto, and I believe there was actually an incident in Calgary recently as well, the anti-Semitism is again, it's just more synagogues and stores and vandalism and arson. And it's just, I can't, in this podcast, fix the Middle East. I've tried. Didn't work. I gave it the old college try and failed to solve all of that part of the world's problems. But can we not burn down synagogues? Like, can that be my request to people in Canada? Talk about Jen having some grace for herself. Let's just have some grace for each other. And, this week, they're one of the only actual federal stories this week. A pretty quiet week overall out of Ottawa. something weird happened at a committee that I'm going to have to go look at. I don't really know what the fuck that was, but one of the only actual stories this week on a federal sense was that the RCMP arrested 2 guys in Richmond Hill, the town I grew up in. I'm born in Toronto. I live in Toronto, but I grew up in Richmond Hill, which Toronto area listeners will know that's like just a few minutes north of the city limits. They caught 2 guys in a hotel room, they said, who had just recorded their Islamic State video and were setting off to commit a mass casualty attack in Toronto. Mm-hmm. Toronto police have not said who the targets were or were going to be, but given the recent level of concern among the Jewish community in Toronto, there's a lot of suspicion that it might have been a Jewish summer camp or something like that. And that's speculation. I don't know. I can't speak to that. But we've been lucky, I think, to keep things at the relatively low level they are. And to any of our Jewish listeners, I don't say that to be dismissive of your concern. I'm not saying what you guys are putting up with ain't bullshit. I'm just saying worse is always possible. I think we got really lucky, and full credit to them, that the RCMP busted this up before someone did something stupid. I would like to see this shit not boil over in my own country, but I don't know. I don't feel lucky these days.
You know, I would just make a very obvious point, and that is, if you have passionate feelings about what's going on in Israel and Gaza, I mean, those are obviously widely shared passionate feelings across the globe. Blowing up a Canadian synagogue is not going to solve any problems or change any minds. I hate to be this obvious about the statement, because this should be very clear, but I think some people have lost their heads a bit.
Mm.
You know, going after Jewish daycares and Jewish schools and in Canada, that is going to fix 0 problems. That is not only is that terrorism, and it's violent and it's criminal, it's unacceptable in its face, but the only problem that solves is the problem in your own heart. That solves
in your head.
In your head. You're angry, you're pissed off, you feel hatred, and you want to express that hatred through violent action. That solves nothing except to give you personally an outlet to express your feelings, and in ways that are unacceptable. That's narcissism. That's just narcissism. That's all that is. It's my feelings are more important than the safety and well-being of the people in my community. It's antisocial behavior. It doesn't fix anything in the Middle East. It doesn't send a statement. It doesn't effectively change the course or any outcomes. It is the worst possible way of going about trying to resolve your feelings on the issue. If you want to go spend your time sort of and your emotions raising money for humanitarian relief for Gaza, for example, that is a productive use of that passion and that emotion. You want to go write letters to your MPs and try to sway their support? Great. You're participating in a process that's completely fine. You want to join protests, preferably ones that did not engage in anti-Semitic chants? Fine. Cool. No issues. Like, vaya con Dios, go with God, man. But there isn't any excuse or any reason to be going off the line and engaging in violence to the Jewish community here in Canada or in America. There just is there's no rationale for that. There's nothing about that is acceptable. So I don't know. I mean, I hate to be schoolmarmy about this, but I'm already dressed like I'm from the 90s. I might as well just lean into it.
Yeah, you know what? Look, I don't have a lot to add to that. Not once after October 7th did it occur to me that I should go throw a Molotov at a Palestinian community center or a mosque. Not once during the Russian invasion of Ukraine have I thought I should go smash the windows outside a Russian bakery. Like, I don't know how to talk to the people who would do that. I don't know if you can talk to them. You hopefully, monitor the social channels, make the arrests, but unfortunately, no one likes this, but this has to, communities have to police themselves on this stuff.
Yeah.
And, there was, you probably saw this, but Global News has reported that the elder of the 2 men arrested in Richmond Hill had, in 2015, been part of an ISIS video hacking a bound prisoner in the Middle East.
Great. What was he doing in Richmond Hill?
That's a really good question.
What?
that there has as yet been no answer to.
Okay. Great. Well, we're going to end this podcast off on a more cheerful note, I think. But until then, like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe.
I understand that you have some choice words for our colleagues in the media.
Well, it's funny. I was teasing you in the last segment about how you're going to fall hard off the Twitter bandwagon and just start individually naming.
Yeah.
Here is a list of every Canadian journalism in the country, and why they're an asshole. That's going to be Jen's next Twitter thread. No, look, I'm not here to pick a fight with the media writ large, but there are a couple of media adjacent stories that I thought were worth mentioning. And I know our listeners, I don't know, some of our listeners absolutely love the inside baseball stuff. Some of them hate it. And guys, we left it to the last for a reason. If you hate it, your podcast is over. Goodbye. Have a good long weekend.
Thanks for coming out. Enjoy your summer. Like and subscribe.
If you love it, stick around because we're just getting started. I read a Jeff Simpson column in the Globe and Mail, which my friend Chris Selly would probably tell me was my first mistake.
Ouch!
Jeff was writing about the 2% NATO commitment.
Okay.
And Jeff was making the argument that it's an arbitrary pledge and that Canada does not really face any particular military threats, and therefore that explains why we have generally been a laggard on defense. And Jeff also noted that the underfunding of the military is a bipartisan issue, conservatives and liberals alike, and that is unquestionably true. Agree with that? The issue of whether or not we have faced any significant military threat, I think it's debatable. I think it's an equally valid proposition that, of course, we have. We've just chosen to pretend that we haven't. Well, but I'm not.
Also, we also over rely on the military for natural disaster management.
We sure do. Yep.
So,
and then the first part of Jeff's argument was that it's an arbitrary target, which sends me yet again back to school, reiterating once more with feeling, it's not an arbitrary target. It's what we agreed to do. And I know this is a crass metaphor, Jen, but you know what else is an arbitrary promise? Marital monogamy.
Do you know what else is technically not real, man? Money.
Sure.
Money's not
fiat currency, right?
Money's not real if you start to think about it.
The social contract? Yeah, look, I don't think Canada should hit 2% because 2% is magic. I think Canada should hit 2% because I think Canada should follow through on its promises.
And the consequences if we don't follow through on our promises and commitments.
I just don't realize. Well, I'll rephrase that. I don't know if others realize how unbecoming it is of us as individuals or as a nation to be so palpably resentful of other people holding us to only what we have agreed to do.
Don't they see how good we are, though, Matt? We're good people. Doesn't that count for something?
We are cheap, petty, and petulant. We don't have to be this way. And that's what's so frustrating about this issue to me. We could do better. Better is possible. We could live up to our word.
That would require us to make priorities and maybe say no to social spending on other things, though.
Honestly, again, I'm not here to create controversy in the media. I don't do beefs. I love everybody. I'm just here to make friends. But I would suggest that Jeff Simpson's recent column on Canadian defense spending could be viewed, perhaps uncharitably, but perhaps simply neutrally, as the apex column of a certain pattern of thought in Canadian society, which is that the world owes us because we're Canada. And it doesn't matter what we've pledged to do. It's just, well, how dare you hold us to our own word? It's an ugly, ugly thing, I think. And we've been lucky to get away with it as long as we have. And that has been You know, we've got big oceans, we've got a superpower to our south, et cetera, et cetera. But is there nothing in the Canadian character anymore that simply feels a sense of duty to the world?
How about shame? Let's go beyond duty. Is there no shame?
Have you no decency, sir?
Have you no decency?
Sorry, I don't mean to McCarthy, Jeff. I'm not suggesting he's a McCarthy, but no, sure. I call it duty, you call it shame. Either works. There are things we should do, either because we should do them, or simply because we have pledged to it.
Well,
and fundamentally, whether
shame is the emotion that comes about where you're at when your actions don't match your words, right? Like you espouse a value or you espouse a certain set of values, and then
or your image of yourself, yeah,
or you have an image of yourself, and then your actions don't live up to those images and your values exist. How in the fucking world does Canada? And I'm going to pin this on the Liberals because the Liberals are particularly bad at this shit, but they're not unique in this. But how does this country? Because I mean, this country elected these people, right? We did. How do we get off preaching others about the importance of an international rules-based order that we are not willing to contribute our share, our committed, open, public share of blood and treasure to? Where the fuck do we get off talking about the importance of like civility in politics, rules-based order, those Trump people, they're the baddies, they're the crazy ones, all this kind of shit, if we're not willing to play table stakes to that very order? I don't understand. I don't know. Am I autistic? Am I missing a social cue here? Am I like, what the fuck is wrong with us?
On the advice of my attorney, I plead the Fifth Amendment. Canada's a spoiled child.
Yeah, that's the way we're acting.
It's the way we are. And again, like, if we accept one of the premises of Jeff's arguments, which is that we are so largely immune from danger, which, by the way, I don't accept it, but if we did, then our failure would, in that case, would not be failure to hit the 2%. It would be pledging to hit something that we had no desire or intention to hit because it wasn't necessary. Like, if Canada actually sincerely felt that because of our specific circumstances, 2% was stupid, it is then incumbent on us to say to the allies, no, we're not going to do that. But we're going to do the following things. This is how we're going to contribute to the alliance. And maybe the alliance is going to go, yeah, okay, well, Canadians are showing up. That's fair. We'll accept that. Or maybe they go, fuck you. That's not good enough. But we haven't had the guts or the honesty or the decency to do that.
I mean, the terrible irony is that, like, for example, if Canada had spent, say, not $13 billion on EVs and instead spent $13 billion in taxpayer funds and, like, something like, oh, I don't know, like getting more natural gas to Tidewater or something like that, we might have been able to negotiate that as part of our 2% commitment. Like, look, we're not necessarily going to be able to be supplying military personnel or defense commitment, but instead we're going to put a lot of taxpayer funds to ensuring that the alliance is well supported for coal, gas, natural gas, all of these sorts of basic minerals that it needs to function its fleets. Like, we could see ourselves as that's a valuable role that we could play within the alliance. But then that would force us to do dirty things like to handle more natural resources, and we don't really want to do that. That's dirty, right? Look, the thing that I would ask you here is if we actually had no intention of meeting that commitment and that the commitment was stupid, then why did we agree to it? Why did we agree to it? Like think through it. Like, okay, so we wanted to be at the table. We wanted to have preferential access to allies' markets and economic benefits. Like, we wanted to have access to allies' intelligence networks. We wanted to get all of these benefits that would accrue to us from agreeing to the target. So we're just not paying the bill.
I think that's exactly it. But I would add one more item.
Sure.
With the one more item. Oh, sorry, my dog somehow escaped down here. Scotty, stop it, buddy. Go upstairs. The one more item I would add to that is simply that I think we like how it sounds when we say it. I think it gives Canadian politicians a bit of a feel-good, moralizing buzz to show up and stand behind the symbol of whatever organization we're appearing at that day and to say the things. But that gives them the head rush. Canada proudly contributes to the rules-based international order. Then we go home, the military is like, well, we need ships. No. I'm spending that money on something else.
China's interfering in your electoral politics. No, it's not. You're racist. Rules-based order. Rules-based order.
So I think it's a head rush. I want to make one more point on the Simpson column, and then I'll move on to the other media item on my list.
The first little shot I'll also take is obviously the world needs more Canada. The world needs more people who say the right thing but do shit all.
The world does need more Canada. Canada's just not interested. Like Canada loves being told the world needs more of us because we interpret that as flattery rather than like a request for help.
Yeah, as an admonition. The world actually is kind of needing you here, Canada.
Yeah,
we're needing a little more.
Wow.
The world actually needs the world needs more Canada. More. We need more.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. You noticed.
You like us.
They really like us. Here's my last comment on this, and then I'll pivot here. The fundamental moral problem of the Jeff Simpson school of thought on this is that Canadian security would thereby depend on our allies being more honorable in their dealings with us than we are with them. And that's the giveaway. The whole argument that we don't need much of a military because either we're safe or because we're part of alliance systems hinges upon our allies being good allies, which is the thing we're refusing to do because we take for granted that they will be more honorable than we have been.
I don't have news for you about what a dishonorable United States looks like for Canada. That goes on a spectrum from not great and collapsing quality of life to like real bad.
Yeah, to decidedly suboptimal.
Like, how does Puerto Rico sound for you? Does that seem like a good deal for the Puerto Rico?
I mean, honestly, in the deep dark of the Canadian winter, Puerto Rico sounds great. But
yes, I know that without the weather part, you still get
Puerto Rico
with the
north.
weather. Yeah. I don't know, just in my sci-fi fantasy head, I just go to weird places. I'm just saying.
Yeah, no, I know, but we all benefit from the journey. The only other thing I'm going to make, and this is something I'm actually going to drop into the written dispatch. You want to write a dispatch this weekend? It's long week. I guess we should.
We probably should write a dispatch.
Okay, we'll write a dispatch this weekend.
We've been pretty lax in our publishing schedule this week, so Jasper excluded.
Not a ton happening out there.
That's true. It's been pretty slow.
There is a new study out, and I'll make this point very briefly. There's a new study out looking at the effect of Bill C-18, the Online News Act, on the Canadian news industry. And
pray tell, Matt, how has C-18 saved the Canadian news industry?
There have been, what was that great term the Liberals came up with? Underway with difficulty? Yep. Or underway with challenges. So it's an interesting report. I'll link to the full thing. It's publicly available, but I'm not going to read all of it onto the podcast now. But to me, the key takeaway, and this is something you and I have talked about and we anecdotally suspected, but now it's actually interesting to see it broken down. C-18, the Online News Act, was, put in place so that the tech giants, which is Google and Meta, the company that owns Facebook, would fund Canadian journalism. Google eventually came to an agreement and contributed $100 million. The Liberals trumpet that $100 million. You and I have reason to believe that Google, while offering up that single $100 million payment, also withdrew from a series of existing agreements that might have made that $100 million effectively a wash.
Well, I don't think it was a wash. I think we don't know exactly whether or not it was a wash for Google because we don't know for how much money Google was had created with content agreements with various Canadian publishers prior to that. Like that's
it was less than $100 million.
It was less than $100 million. But it may not have been radically less than $100 million. And also
Yeah,
Google
I think
may
that's
be
right.
willing to spend more money in order to centralize the administration of that distribution of funds, right? Like
Yep.
Google might, from Google's perspective, it might actually wind up being a wash, even if they're spending a little bit more money into the ecosystem. Also, what's very, very hilarious is how that $100 million is now being distributed. Like the group of people who are controlling access to that $100 million is like a lot of small independent media, like the older media is losing its shit about it. It's very funny. I've been meaning to write about it, but it's great to watch. I totally have the popcorn out for it. It's amazing.
That's the Google side of it. Meta pulled out entirely.
Yes.
Meta simply now blocks links on Facebook and Instagram. The study, to the extent possible, observed the effect on traffic to Canadian media organizations that had. And so the easy answer, as the listeners and viewers would expect, was that traffic is down. An immediate and observable drop in a massive one from Facebook and Instagram. Not complete. There's still some leakage coming through, but we're looking at, I think the number in the report is about 85% drop in incoming traffic from Meta platforms. And then they also looked at other platforms, things like Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, I think was one. There have been increases in those categories, but not enough to offset the loss of Facebook and Instagram. So a year out, we are down. And I thought that was really interesting to see that, because at the line, and I'm not going to reveal sensitive business information, we observed that.
Yeah.
Like there was an observable change in incoming traffic to us. The line, thank God, was relatively isolated this because we primarily use our own email list to distribute our content.
Which, by the way, this is why we need you to sign up to the line so that we are not dependent upon big tech's algorithms to throttle us and make it impossible for us to grow. So please go to the link, www.theline.ca. Please sign up.
Read theline.ca. Don't go to theline.ca. Read theline.ca.
Read the line. Sorry. www.readtheline.ca. We'll put the link in the description below. Check us out. Sign us up. If you like us, please share us with your friends and family. Like this sort of stuff makes a huge difference to us. And it actually makes a difference between our ability to grow and not grow. Because right now, big tech is making it really, really difficult for us to grow in this particular environment as a result of the regulatory changes the Liberals brought in.
Our email list probably saved us as a viable business the last 12 months or so.
Yeah.
So look, I'll drop the link into the report here, but Justin Ling a couple of days ago had a really interesting interview in the Toronto Star with Pascal Saint-Onge, the heritage minister, where he took her to task for the failures of C18. It's good. It's a good article, but I will say this: I would have been harsher than Justin was. He doesn't pull punches. Like he says, like it has not worked. It has failed. But I would have been much harder on them than that. And I think one of the things that I would encourage everyone, including Justin, who's a good friend of ours and the Line, also just a great journalist, but I would just say to him and to everyone, thing we have to remember in everything in life, you have to know what your incentives are and you have to know what the other guy's incentives are. And where they align, there's opportunity for cooperation.
Absolutely.
Where they don't align, someone's going to get shafted.
Yep. And
the media's incentives are to have so much support that we can thrive. The government's incentives are to prevent us from dying. Different things. The government doesn't want the big companies shutting down on their watch because then they get blamed for it. But does the government see a direct incentive in having a thriving post-media investigative unit? I'm going to bet no. So, okay, great work, everybody. Things are going great.
I would just like to point out the C18, the thing that I will write about this eventually is that what I love about the outcome of C18 is that every single party involved got exactly what they deserve. Yep. Exactly what they deserve. No more and no less. The other thing that I would say is like there were individuals, myself included, who testified at committee and warned the government, warned fellow media explicitly, this isn't going to work. Facebook isn't bluffing. They're going to pull the plug on you and you are going to be worse off than you were prior to this whole situation. Because let's also be blunt, $100 million a year from Google is not enough to save the media industry. Like the amount of money that you would need flowing into the industry to even preserve it is orders of magnitude larger than that. $100 million is a pittance when distributed as widely as it needs to be distributed. There were, like, as I said, there were many of us who warned people that this wasn't going to work. Whatever money you got wasn't going to be enough, and the real risk of losing Facebook was going to be significant and quite devastating. Once again,
what do we know?
Yeah, well, going back to Jasper and the same conversations we were having at the beginning of this podcast, you have a government that is unwilling to take constructive criticism, regards all constructive criticism as bad faith, didn't listen to those warnings, and plowed ahead. Now here we are, worse off, arguably worse off than where we were before. C18.
Yep, and I'll make the point that I made before. We will learn zero lessons from this. The entirety of the debate will be figuring out who takes the fall. That's what we do. Like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe.
Have a great long weekend, though, everybody. I mean, I don't mean that insincerely. It is kind of an artificially cheerful note, but hey, we've got a long weekend coming up. I hope everybody has a great one. We're halfway through the summer. I hope it's going great for you. And I guess Jen and I will reluctantly put together a written dispatch this weekend because we didn't do one last week.
I'm very tired, and it's hot and it's sunny, and I want to go play.
I want to go play too. Yeah, playing is fun. Thank you, Jen.
All right. Bye.
Bye.